Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, also the guy in charge, I guess, sort of half over at After Dark, after Cycle Fanatic After Dark. We are here again this week, talking about a couple different things. There's not a ton of football to talk about really yet. Spring practice, padded spring practice, doesn't start for a few weeks yet. So they're really just doing strength and conditioning and all that stuff right now. So there's not like a ton of football to talk about, but the main thing we are going to talk about football wise that we'll talk about is Jimmy Rogers' contract buyout. The details of those were just released via a Freedom of Information Act request. I want to say that the QC Times, the Quad City Times, was the first one to file the open records request, but the Des Moines Register and all the newspapers have essentially reported it at this point. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and kind of what it means going forward, because it's a lot different contract than what we've seen recently from, this is in contrast to like some of the coaching mega deals that we've seen over the last 20 years, really. Dukesters here, go Cyclones, absolutely. And then we'll talk about basketball. Obviously, that's the main gig going on. And today, Iowa State blew out Arizona State. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So, but first up, I do think we should talk about football, and we should talk about Jimmy Rogers' contract. And so they just got it signed pretty recently, because it was kind of a verbally agreed upon. It is verbally agreed upon for quite a while, but it wasn't actually finalized and signed until just recently. But he's got an interesting incentive structure kind of built in the buyout is tied into the incentive structure as well. So for kind of to get as a baseline, Jimmy Rogers is going to make $3 million a year. And he's signed through 2032. So he's signed for the next 6 football seasons, 5 seasons. Yeah. And right. Yeah. 26, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Actually, no, he signed for the next 7 years. So he signed for the next 7 years, next 7 seasons at $3 million a year. But like I said, he's got an interesting incentive structure here. Let me pull it up. I said this was originally, I believe, the request came through the QC Times, I believe, but this is a great, yeah, we'll do some of that as well. That seems fun. College football 27 predictions. Let me pull this up here. QC Times filed the original records request, and then now like a lot of the newspapers have all reported this. I believe this is from the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier. So he's going to, they said $3 million base salary for the next 7 seasons. And then he gets bonuses for everything, which this is the bonuses are not uncommon. It's $250. It's $250,000 if you win 7 games, $500,000 if they win 8, $750 if they win 9, $1 million, an extra $1 million if they win 10, 12, 1.25 if they win 11, 1.5 if they win 12. So that's not a stacking thing. That's just once you hit this threshold, that's your bonus. So essentially, it's an extra $250,000 per extra win. Essentially, it's $250,000 per win above 6. So kind of a funny thing. We go back to the old the Matt Campbell quote: "The bullshit teams care about 6 and 6." Well, this contract cares about 6 and 6, which is funny. Let me zoom this in just a little bit so you can read this a little bit better. $100,000 if they appear in the championship game. $250,000 if they finish in first place in the regular season and appear in the conference championship game, but do not win. $250,000 if they win but not finish in first place in the regular season, and then $500,000 if they finish first place in the regular season, including a tie, and they win the conference title. What's really interesting here is that the prize for finishing first place in the regular season and not winning the conference title is the same as not finishing first place in the regular season and winning the conference title, which is very strange now that I'm kind of reading it again, because the regular season championship doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. Um, and really the just because of the current situation of the Big 12 and just how the playoff works, as things are currently set, the runner up in the Big 12 is definitely not guaranteed a playoff spot. Definitely not. I mean, and in the last couple of years, they have not had two teams in the playoffs. So right now, the runner up for the Big 12 is probably not making the playoff. If you win the conference title, though, you are one of the possible auto bids into the playoff, and most likely you're gonna make it as an auto bid. It would be a very weird situation, which the Big 12 would not. The Big 12 champion would not make the playoff. But well, I guess sort of. Last year you had the ACC where it had Miami as an at-large, but Duke, the conference champion, didn't make it. But that was a 7-5 Duke team, and the ACC was horrible. Whereas Iowa State, if Iowa State was going to win the Big 12, they'd probably have to be 9-3, 10-2, something like that. So they're not going to get left out if they're a Big 12 champion. Um, but it's strange to me that you get the same bonus for these two different, these two very different finishes. Because this one is you finish in first place in the regular season, but explicitly did not win the conference title. Football doesn't have a regular season title and a conference championship title like basketball does, which the basketball one really kind of does and doesn't matter anymore. I mean, like it sort of does, but like even the regular season title, you could say the regular season title is like a better conference championship. And well, it used to be when the Big 12 had a true round robin, but now the Big 12 regular season title in basketball, you could argue how much that actually means, which, you can still say it's the best like measure of a conference champion, but in the end, the winner of the conference tournament is the one that gets the auto bid into the NCAA tournament. And in football, the winner of the conference is the one that is in line to get an auto bid into the college football playoff. So the conference championship game and the conference tournament in basketball are definitely more important to win than the regular season title. But this one essentially is placing the same weight on the regular season title, which functionally kind of means nothing, and winning the Big 12 championship game. It's strange that it seems weird to me that those are weighted the exact same, even though one produces virtually a guaranteed playoff position and the other one absolutely does not. But you do get a $500,000 if you get a tie for the first place and win the conference championship game. Again, I don't know if I would have like to me, you would have said one at $250,000 to say this is what you get if you win, if you finish in first place. Or no, well, actually, what you would just say to me is you would say $100,000. I would have bumped this up $250,000 to appear in the conference championship game. $500,000 if you win it. Done. Like what in what scenario? So this is $100,000 if ISU appears in the Big 12 championship game, or 250,000 if they finish in first place and don't win it. 250,000 because it's an or there. So it's not like as you get this $100,000 and this $250,000 for winning for appearing, you get $250,000. So this is like a weird. I'm not sure when this would kick in. It's kind of strange. I don't know. That's very weird. But anyways, you get some miscellaneous ones here. 50 grand from any season in which ISU is selected and participates in a postseason bowl game or selected to the CFP. So you're automatically getting 50 grand just for making a bowl game. 50 grand, another 50 grand if you win a bowl game or a playoff game. Another 100 grand if you advance to the college football play. If you play for a national title, you get 100 grand. If you get 100 grand if you win the national title, and you get an extra 50 grand if you win Big 12 Coach of the Year. 100 grand, just 100 grand seems like low for winning a natty, but yeah, you would end up having a ton of extra because you'd probably end up hitting that one or that one, and you'd probably hit that one or that one, and then you'd hit that one, that one, that one, that one, and probably that one. So there was a clause in Campbell's contract that allowed him to reduce his personal incentives by up to 100,000 and spread those bonuses among staff as he likes. It's unclear if that's also applied to Rodgers. So yes, we don't know if he has the same assistant pool that um, Campbell had available to him or not. Um, but the important part of the buyout here, though, is that it's 100% of the base. It's the 100% of the entire base compensation remaining for the balance of the term of the agreement. And it gets reduced each season by $500,000. Each season by $500,000 for every game won beyond 6 games, which is very interesting. So the math there, he's right now because he's at 7 years for $3 million. So he's got his $21 million contract. That's what his total value is. Let's say he goes 8-4 for each of the next 3 seasons. And yeah, we'll say 8-4 each of the next 3 seasons. So he's won 2 games above. So you're reduced it by $1 million each season for the extra wins. So $1 million this season, $1 million the next season, $1 million the season after that. So you're losing $3 million off of the buyout in just in extra games won. And he would also be losing $3 million off the buyout each year on base salary. So he would lose 3, 6, 9, and then 12. So if he goes 8-4 for the next 3 years and then wants to leave, his buyout would be 22 million, 21 million of the original minus 12 million there. So you get to 9 million. So his buyout would be 9 million if he went 8-4 for the next 3 years. And then, that kind of goes from there. If you go 10-2, 6-6, 8-4, it's the same thing. Because it's a $500,000 for each game won beyond 6 games. I'm assuming that includes everything. So like if you were to win 11 games and make a college football playoff, then keep winning games and you end up winning, let's say 13 games in a season. Or let's say you go undefeated, you win a conference championship and you win a game in the playoffs. So you win 14 games that season. You're going to lose $4 million off the buyout that season just in extra games won. So let's say that happens next season. Next season, Iowa State goes undefeated in the regular season, wins the Big 12 title, wins a playoff game. You're gonna have 14 wins. So you're gonna lose the 3 off of the original contract, plus another 8, plus another 4 million there. So you're gonna immediately lose $7 million off the buyout right there. So you're gonna go straight down to 14 million right after that. So you can read that as every 6 wins past a 6 game win average is an extra year's worth of buyout dropped off. It's an interesting structure that I think is you're probably going to see that become more common. I think I would agree. I think Chris Williams on Cyclone Fanatic has suggested this on multiple occasions as well, that the massive coaching contracts with the massive buyouts are probably going to be going by the wayside, I think, because schools are like now that you have NIL and revenue sharing requirements and all this, schools just can't afford to be paying 15, 20, 30, 50 million, $100 million buyouts anymore. They just can't do it. Or at least most of them can't. The schools that have massive NIL reserves, massive like donor reserves, maybe like Michigan, Ohio State, apparently Indiana, Tennessee, these schools that have massive NIL reserves, Penn State, they may still get away with doing these massive buyouts because they can afford them. Texas A&M, Texas, schools like that. But for a lot of other schools that don't have these massively rich donor bases, even a good chunk of the SEC, like Alabama, will not be able to get away with this probably. Alabama is sneaky not a rich school. They have a very rich, football history, but as far as just like average wealth of their donor base, it's not really a lot different from Iowa State. Really, it's a very blue collar fan base, very blue collar school. So they win a lot of football games, obviously, and they continue to get really great football players. I mean, they can get good NIL package. I mean, they have more NIL money than Iowa State does, but just because of they are Alabama. But if it was just about a, a donor base, their donor base really isn't any more wealthy than Iowa State's is. But you know, the medium and smaller schools need to be able to retain some level of flexibility because anymore programs really can't I don't programs really can't afford to really miss big on coaches anymore. For like Iowa State, this Jimmy Rogers hire is critical. It is critical that Jimmy Rogers works out. I think like the program survive like it can still be good down the road if Jimmy doesn't work out, but it's going to set you back for a while, and you will essentially kind of lose what you built with Matt Campbell. So what schools like Iowa State need to have is flexibility. So let's say in a few years down the road, it's very clear that it's not working out with Jimmy Rogers. Um, and this is a hypothetical, obviously. A few years down the road, it's clear that Jimmy Rogers isn't working out. They're not, they're not hitting their goals at all. They're not making bowl games and stuff like that. They're not really ever. They're not, you know, they're consistently in the 3 to 5 wins. Maybe they jump up and get one bowl game, but they're mostly in the 3 to 5 win thing. Iowa State needs to have the flexibility to be able to make a change to preserve the integrity of the program and make sure that it doesn't it doesn't fall back into obscurity, because they've got a foundation now where you can build a perennial winner from where you're at right now. You can do that, but they absolutely cannot afford to let the program fall backwards because the coach's buyout is too big and they can't afford to pay that when if the time should come that needs to happen. So for the schools, it just doesn't make sense to have massive buyouts anymore. Uh, Even though you sure does it, would theoretically you staple a massive buyout and then Penn State wants to come, wants to come for Jimmy Rogers, or Ohio State wants to come for Jimmy Rogers, or whoever, Texas, somebody, some big rich school wants to come and get Jimmy Rogers. Theoretically, would them paying a $50 million buyout, would that give Iowa State some cash? Yeah, but it's more like, I mean, one, those big schools may not be willing to pay that massive buyout to the point where you may end up having to go to the negotiating table anyways to negotiate something lower. But you know, the, the other side of that is if it's not working out, you don't want to be stuck with a lame duck coach for multiple years because your program will start to die. And that's obviously not to say, that's not to say that, that's nothing to say about what's actually going to happen with Jimmy Rogers. I firmly believe that he's a good hire. I like the roster he's got together. I like the start that they have to this new era of Iowa State football. But to a certain extent, Iowa State has to protect itself. It has to be able to protect itself. Um, you know, so I just don't think a lot of coaches we'll call it, anything below like tier two, if you want to call it that. If you're calling tier one, that's your Texas, Ohio State, Michigan, Florida, Penn State, maybe maybe USC, probably Oregon, any really high end football school that also has a bunch of money. Then there's the next level. That's a high end football school that has, then your next tier would be either a high end football school that has like medium money, or it's a medium football school that has a lot of money. There's a number of schools that fall into this kind of range. Like Oklahoma is a high end school that has like medium to high money. They don't have tier one money, but they've got like tier two money, but they're they play tier 1.5 level football, but they have kind of tier two money. You know, um, Texas Tech Texas Tech has arguably maybe tier one money, tier 1.5 money. They play tier two, maybe tier three football. Uh, you know, You could probably throw Texas A&M into this. They play tier 2, tier 3 football. They easily have tier 1 money. You get the idea. Tennessee is probably in that category as well. They kind of play tier 2 football, tier 2 money. Anything that and below, maybe even just the step below that, you're going to see more contracts like this that are more protective of the school and allow them more flexibility to make sure that they can always have the right person in charge running the program, and that they don't let a program fade where they are forced to hang on to somebody for too long, because they just can't afford to get rid of them, basically. Um, we've seen what happens when programs hang on to coaches too long. We saw Iowa basketball hang on to Fran McCaffrey way too long. You could make an argument that Iowa is on the verge of hanging on to Kirk Ferentz too long. They keep winning games because the middle and bottom of the Big Ten is terrible, but you know, Oklahoma State hung on to Mike Gundy way too long. Yeah, we've you know we've seen what happens when programs keep coaches for too long, and they're not good anymore, and then the momentum of the program completely slips, and then your next hire after that becomes even more critical, because then now you're trying to rebuild and get back to where you were instead of just maintain and build from there. So overall, I think Iowa State did a good job with this contract. It's I think it's good for Jimmy because he can make a bunch of money if he puts together a winning football program. He can make a bunch of money. You know, just going 10-2 and making a Big 12 title game is going to get him. What is it? 10-2 gets him an extra million there, so that gets him to 4. You're going to get at least an extra quarter million out of 10-2. You're probably not. You maybe finish tie for first place. Depends on if those two are out. If it's like lose to Iowa, lose one conference game, maybe. You're probably getting 250,000 there. You're probably getting $1 million there. So just from making the Big 12 title game, you're probably getting to 4. You're probably getting to 4.5 or 4. You're getting to 4.25, and then maybe you get an extra 5. Maybe you get to 4.3 right there if you win the Big 12 Coach of the Year, stuff like that. He can make decent money, each year by just him putting together a thing. So it works for Jimmy. It works for Iowa State to keep this thing manageable in case it doesn't work out. It gives Jimmy some flexibility if he wants it. I mean, they can always negotiate these things. They can work on something later on a later contract if they want. But overall, I like this contract really for both sides, but especially for Iowa State as well. So